welcome back to Getting to the Top, where I interview transformational leaders about their leadership journey. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Ms. Elisa Doldron. She is a seasoned and creative business executive with over 24 years of experience within demand generation roles in the fast-moving consumer goods industry. 16 plus of those years with Nestle as the #1 global player in food and beverage. And over the last 7.5 years, she's held progressive roles at the C-suite level. She's a member of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. She has had amazing jobs with Angostura. She's had senior consumer marketing management roles. She's a long-standing female executive in the industry, and she has been married for 17 years, which is amazing considering that she doesn't look old enough to have done that. But with all of that, I really want to give Elise a chance to introduce herself and to tell us about her current role, and then we can talk about how she got there. Elise, take it away.
Thank you, Racquel, for having me. It's really my pleasure, to be here to chat with you. I think, women in leadership, it's a topic I'm really passionate about. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a real creative, definitely, a right brainer who's learned how to tap into her left brain. Started my career quite young. So as you mentioned, I look quite young, but I have quite a lot of years under my belt. That's really because I made the choice at a young age to switch from full-time study to part-time, so that I could actually get a job and start building my experience base. So from that journey to now, I would say, I have definitely massive wealth of experience, a lot of depth and breadth across multiple areas of generating demand in the FMCG industry. And, I've had a really rewarding career experience to date.
Okay, so tell us specifically what's your role at Nestle now?
So most recently, the role of business executive officer. So that's a title that you hear more so within the multinational arena. It's simply, business unit head, where you have, full P&L accountability. And there are mainly 3 key pillars of the responsibility. So the first is, of course, business strategy and business leadership. The second is business finance, so that's where the element of the performance of the business and P&L accountability, and then the third pillar is actually brand building. So that's where I come to life and my creative juices start flowing. I definitely have over time progress beyond just core marketing to actually business executive and really tapping into the financial element of it as well. So
okay, great. And tell me, what do you enjoy most about that role? Like what is it that sort of lights you on fire?
To me, it's really been the entrepreneurial opportunity. So it's almost within the context of the multinational environment and within, let's say, the Caribbean region. So within the role, there was a regional scope where you basically have the opportunity to drive a business and a business result through the region, developing the strategy and really driving and leading that with the team and key stakeholders to achieve business results. So for me, it's been a great opportunity to test different models, different strategies, different portfolio evolution strategies, innovation, I think, which has been the most fun, and of course, creating and developing brands.
Lovely. So tell us, how did it all start? What did you think you were going to be when you were growing up? Well, how did you start?
Well, I was always quite creative. Interestingly, my father wanted me to go into engineering, and we had a bit of a battle in the beginning, trying to figure, which route I would take. But when I started studying business and then I started studying marketing, I really, felt a creative passion ignite, where you can really do transformational work when, you look at a brand or, a scenario in business in a particular context, and you can actually see a roadmap evolve and take different steps, make different decisions along the way to actually take something from point A to point B. And I think that's what I've enjoyed the most about, marketing as a very creative as a career, but also from the business side, seeing those strategies actually come to life and deliver business results. And I think that's been kind of my trajectory so far.
Okay, so you wanted to study engineering, and then at what point did you sort of switch to marketing or switch to business?
At a young age. So it was, a little bit of let's say my father kind of driving me towards engineering. And then I said, what about child psychology? And then I thought that might be a longer study route. And then somehow I kind of fell into the, when you study at the A levels, you look at the principles of business, principles of accounting. And it just started to create, interest where when I started, studying at UE with the BSc program and I touched general management, I said, I really like the marketing module. And then I researched and I found the Chartered Institute of Marketing in the UK, and I realized that they had an entire, career pathway that you can and develop your skills as a marketer and then as a business executive. So I just did that pivot quite young, and really, did a specialist type study profile in marketing.
So then when you left school, what was the first job?
Actually, I was a brand manager. So I worked for a company called L.J Williams LTD, where I actually had the opportunity to lead the confectionery portfolio. So a lot of fun brands in there, many popular ones like M&M, Snickers, Twix, Milky Way, even Tunnocks Caramel, Ferrero Rocher. So it was a great starting point where, it was, working through a distributor model. Where you're getting, the strategy handed down to you from, let's say, the principals, and really taking the advertising promotional spend and localizing it to execute to deliver the results. And I think, I had that first job for about 4 years. And then after that, I would have, through an industry contact, met someone at Angostura and transitioned to there where I was able to work with the flagship Angostura aromatic bitters brand, and that was a great time there. And actually, I was the lead at the time to develop the now popular Angostura LLB.
Wonderful. So how did you get noticed in that first role? You're just starting out, you mentioned networking, which was key to your, finding the next role. But in that role, moving through that role over a 4-year period, you would have been going through rapid growth. You would have been learning a lot. How did you get noticed in that role?
I think it's if I look back, it's been a combination of what, you call the what and the how, right? And I think many people, young ones in business don't really understand that balance that's required, because you really need to be able to deliver results, but you almost need to have the how element, the leadership thinking, the leadership behaviors, the work ethic, the communication style, to be able to balance both to really get noticed. And I think that's really, the piece of advice that I tend to share with the young ones. It's how do you stand out from the crowd? What makes you special? And it's, in the early days, it's really a bit about, the what and the how, so delivering performance results. How you do that, working in teams, how you communicate at different levels in the organization, and also an element of agility. So, agility has different facets. There's learning agility, there's mental agility, there is, people agility. How do you communicate at different levels? Can you communicate with the van sales team? Can you communicate with the CEO? There's change agility, and I think that's one that has been a bit of my superpower, along the journey, where you're just open to change and you understand that change is part of life and it will come. So it's really how you navigate accordingly. So I think the elements of what, how, and then the agility is what would have helped me to stand out from the crowd at a young age.
So tell me a specific story about your change agility. Bring that to life for us with a specific example.
Well, I would say most recently, at my, my time at Nestle, 16 and a half years thus far, we would change market heads quite often, right? So you would have market heads changing out every, let's say, 18 months to 3 to 4 years. And some, different profiles. You have some more entrepreneurial profiles, some more, structured profiles. And with that comes a lot of, evolution. And sometimes a pivot in the direction of the strategies. So I would say change really has been something I've become very used to and almost come to expect. So it's really, how do you filter out what, let's say, doesn't serve you in the long run, and how do you look at what this opportunity will bring in a positive light? And I think that's where change agility has been something that I've been recognized for over my time.
So how did you learn about that though in your early career? I remember, for me, one of the big changes that I went through was that I was working for JP Morgan Chase, and they were closing the Atlanta office and moving all of us to New York. And in that moment, I knew I don't want to move to New York. I don't know how to raise my daughter in New York. I need to figure out what I do next. And that's how I decided to move back to the Caribbean. And that was such a great experience for me because Chase had been so wonderful in that transition and helping us decide on how we moved forward and, walking us through the process of determining, okay, if you're not going to stay, well, we're going to help you to find what's the next thing. They found us headhunters. They gave us office space. So it was really, a scary but exciting time because you knew that something different was about to happen and you started preparing yourself well with their support for that change. So in your early career, back when you were in that first role, how did you recognize, like what was a specific instance where you had to sort of draw on your change agility?
I would say it would be, I would put it down to really two things. One is my family upbringing, and I would say my parents did instill in me at a young age the power of the mind and that everything happens for a reason. And complemented that is my faith. So I always believed that there's a higher power and there's a higher power guiding your path. So many times you may not see what's right in front of you, but with that faith and that trust that whatever you encounter on your journey has a purpose, whether it is to fail, to teach you something, to teach you a life lesson. So I had this combination of this power of the mind and being able to navigate whatever comes my way. And then faith, believing that everything happens for a reason and there's a bigger purpose. So that when I encounter change, I really do try to see the glass half full. And I really try to see what this could mean, because I was not afraid to fail. And I think that's one of my has been one of the things that has helped me to succeed is not being afraid to fail and being quite willing to take risks, calculated risks, of course, but knowing that sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So that I think at a young age, having that confidence in that, okay, if it doesn't work out, it's for a reason. And that I would say, did help me quite a bit to navigate change.
So tell it, you talked about networking to find the next role. Tell me about that networking. What were you doing specifically?
Well, I would say it would be a combination of my own attempts, but also, as I would have mentioned in my bio, being married for over 17 years, you almost start to blend your professional circles with that of your spouse. And thankfully, through some of his contacts as well, I was able to kind of expand my network. And within that expanded network was actually the head of HR, at these companies. So, I would say, just being in social circles and meeting the right people at the right time was quite helpful in the early days.
Okay, so certainly tapping into not just your own network, but tapping into the network of the people that you are close to, whether
Absolutely.
it's your spouse or your friends, and having them, by sort of degrees of separation, having them introduce you to other people who you can then lean on and reach out to. And how did you reach out? Was it, you met them at a party, you met them at coffee? How specifically, how did you meet the person? And then what was the follow-up? What was that like?
Well, thankfully, they were always in coherent social settings. So it might have been at a coffee shop, it might have been at dinner, it might have been at sushi, where you just happen to meet different contacts. And, they would say, hey, share with me your number. I have something in mind. And, you get a call, a couple of weeks later, and it kind of, manifested into something more. So I would say, yeah, just, really always being prepared for what could happen. Always presenting yourself in the best way possible in different settings, so that when those opportunities present themselves, you're in good standing.
Okay, great. So you moved from the first job into Angostura. So tell us about Angostura. What was that experience like?
Well, at the time I joined Angostura, it was a really great time. I mean, Lawrence Dupree was still very much present, and it was a very young team. So we had, these regional brand managers across the different alcohol brands. I was working with the non-alcoholic portfolio, so this would have been the Angostura aromatic bitters brand, and then later the LLB. And it was a great learning experience, because at that time we actually had Gabriel Faria, who's a well-known executive in the industry, as a marketing executive, and he really gave a lot of tough love and a lot of functional development. he also brought in, executive coaches to help us to develop as a team. So I would say, it really provided a great opportunity for me to build a functional competency and also to observe, a little bit of the boardroom element, because of course Mr. Lubre was very much present, and being part of the monthly board meetings. And so it started to open my eyes to beyond, life as an individual contributor in your current role, but almost what could your future life look like at a different level, and almost observing, different role models and seeing, the different styles of communication and saying, okay, I like that. I'm going to take a page from this person's book. I'm going to take a page from this person's book. So I would say that experience in Angostura was great. And it also allowed me the opportunity to bring creativity to the table because of the LLB project, right? So interestingly, that concept came about. Lawrence Bray had been on to a trip in Australia, and after cricket, he went to a bar and they offered him this drink, and he just came back to Trinidad and said, okay, how can we make this, ready to drink? And it was, out of a simple concept like that, that we had the creative, the flexibility to just create something from scratch. And I think that was a great, great opportunity at Angostura that kind of kickstarted my innovation mindset.
So tell us about the thought process behind it. So you're like, had you had an LLB before? Did you know what it was? And then how did you approach
in the
it?
Caribbean, we have something called a Bentley, right? Which is quite similar. So it was really just, and of course, Angostura Aromatic Bitters is a brand that has been around since the 1800s. It's almost in every single bar you find it in the world. And, the challenge that we had with the brand at that time was the fact that it doesn't expire because of the alcohol content that stabilizes it. So you have this bottle in your pantry that you just never finish. So, the strategies that we came up with were twofold. One was, how do we, get the product, additional usage in food, for example, where you can use it as a marinade, as a flavor enhancer, because then you really use a couple dashes more than you would just in any typical drink. And then as well, how do you get people creating it as part of their drink repertoire? So LLB was something more mainstream. It wasn't something that you only have once a year. And we felt that those were two kind of avenues that we pursued while I was there to really kind of increase the volume consumption of bitters, which is the flagship portfolio. So it was great to test these strategies and see how can we get, because obviously with business and with growth, you gain market share either through, additional sales portfolio or getting new consumers, or you actually get your current consumers to consume more. So it was kind of, how do we test those different models to continue to drive this, compounded growth year on year.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people use bitters as a gift. So, because it's something so Caribbean that many people don't always realize is so Caribbean.
Yes.
Yeah, so
I
it's
really
a great
loved my time with that brand.
Excellent. So tell us what else did you learn while you were at Angostura?
I would say, just a little bit about, the portfolio management, about different types of marketing strategies. So of course, being less what you call an on-premise brand, there was a little bit more of the event type execution. So not, just the typical food and beverage, okay, supermarket sampling, for example, but you really were opened up to a bigger world of exposure in terms of how you could market a brand and different strategies. As well, understanding, different consumer segments, because, for example, even within the category of rum, there are so many different, let's say tiers in rum consumption profiles. There's a really, really affluent consumer who would pay top dollar for a top shelf type of product. And then you have the everyday consumer who just wants, a rum drink. So, I think it was the portfolio element and the creativity that comes behind that. And then, from the manufacturing side, understanding how you can use your manufacturing capability to develop a portfolio with a spectrum of offerings, So they're talking to many different consumers, and also the innovation opportunities that come with that. And if you look at, some of the work that Angostura has done since then is, a lot of the evolution in flavors and line extensions and flavors and different editions and, enhancing packaging. And, as well, I would think it would have been opening my eyes to the more global landscape before, of course, then transitioning to Nestle. So at Angostura, of course, it's a local gem. It's a company it's born right here in Trinidad and Tobago and has global reach. So it's really an amazing organization for what it's achieved. And I think, I'm very grateful for my time there, because it really did open my eyes to, a lot of different aspects of business, manufacturing, marketing, portfolio management, and so on.
Wonderful. So then when you were deciding now you're ready for something bigger, a bigger challenge, how did you find Nestle?
Well, interestingly, it was through another networking, situation where, you're chatting with someone who then happens to be the human resources manager at Nestle. And she said, you should send me your resume. We might have something coming up soon. And I said, sure, okay, let me send that over to you. And then you get a call, you go through the interview process, you do your business case, you meet all of these intimidating gentlemen around the room. And then you go through this process and then you get the call to say you've gotten the job, So for me, it wasn't me pursuing them, but the opportunity presented itself at a time when I thought it was, the right time to try something else. Having worked in local organizations, in multinational experience was, very important, I think, at that stage of my career, because you really get exposure to world-class thinking, best practices, and different guidelines and tools that you can use that really are quite advanced and well developed.
Very nice. So yet another networking opportunity where you're having a conversation and the person turns out to be the HR manager. I think it's so important because I think a lot of young people don't realize how important the networking is and how important, your network is. And sometimes people don't realize that it's not that everyone is necessarily a connection, although you should treat everyone as though they are. But there are some people that are called like super connectors who they know a lot of different people. And it's really important for you throughout your career to identify those connectors and make sure that you are connecting with them and being of service to them so that they have the opportunity to connect you to other people. And I think some people are so great at that and so natural. And if you really want to see your career skyrocket, that's a great way to do that, is to identify the connectors in your network and make sure you're reaching out to them, not just for them to do something for you, but to also figure out what are some of the things that you can do for them so that you are of value to them, to help them, to have them help you get connected within their networks. Because, I've heard this saying, your network is your net worth. And I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, and I think, it's really, as you say, it's a value exchange. So of course, young people shouldn't really go into something in a one-sided way with an opportunistic mindset. But as you said, it's how can you create value exchange? And how can you be of service in some way and, make this a meaningful relationship on both sides? And I would say this is probably an area that, maybe some of us in the industry as female executives should come together and create these types of spaces for the younger ones who don't have that network and haven't had yet those opportunities for success. And maybe it's something, we consider as a next step to help the young ones in the industry.
Yes, I'd love that. We definitely need to create more visibility for some of the talent that we have, because I think we have such amazing talent in the Caribbean, globally, and we're just not seeing the kind of recognition that women should have. So I think it's really great. It's a really great idea to create more of those spaces, whether they're organic or formal, to make sure that there is more visibility of the talent that we are producing.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. So you get this opportunity. Tell me about the interviewing process. It sounds like it was really interesting with the case study and rooms full of people. Tell me about the interviewing process.
With any multinational environments, and I believe this is similar across many of them in the industry, you tend to have a matrix structure, right? So you would have a direct reporting line, you'd have a dotted line, you maybe have several dotted lines. So depending on the level of the position and whether or not it's considered a key position, it determines how many key stakeholders need to be a part of that interview process. So when I would have been, interviewing for this regional consumer marketing manager role, I would have had, in the interviewing panel, the regional business leader who would have been sitting in the Dominican Republic, the local country manager who was sitting here, the head of HR. You might have had another HR generalist who would have been sitting in the room, as well as other key stakeholders like the sales manager and so on. So you would have had maybe 1 to 2 rounds of interviews and discussions, and then you would have had to complete a business case where they give you a scenario and say, okay, this is what a P&L looks like. This is the current scenario. What would you do? How would you solve this? What would be the first actions you would take? What would be, your next steps? And then you actually have to create a PowerPoint presentation. Probably you have an hour to do so. You create this PowerPoint presentation, and then you present almost to this panel your thoughts and ideas, right? And almost your read of a P&L. So I would say, of course, it would have been quite intimidating. But I was able to, I would say, intuitively kind of see some patterns in the PNL and ask a couple of key questions and, in the initial discussion before I went into that business case, so that when I was able to present, I was able to provide, I would say, some suggestions and actions that could have been taken that they quite liked, and they said, okay, this was a good interview.
Fabulous. So they told you that right on the spot.
Yes, of course, you then get your call back and so on. But yes, it was a good interview.
Excellent.
So feeling quite relieved.
So what was your level of financial literacy at that point? Like how, was it because you had attended all of those board meetings from Angostura? Was it, tell me about how you developed your financial literacy to be able to go into that interview, read that P&L, and be able to produce a PowerPoint presentation in an hour.
I would say it would be a combination, of course, your functional training. So, of course, as I would have mentioned, I've, completed multiple levels of education with the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and there would have been some, financial literacy elements within there. But definitely my exposure at Angostura was quite helpful, because as a brand manager, you did have responsibility, for definitely the top line. And you may have had a little bit of view into different lines of the P&L, and definitely the bottom line. And being exposed to the board meetings, being exposed to the preparation for those, you start to connect dots in terms of how different lines in the P&L move, which actions to take, which questions to ask. So I would say definitely it was a combination of experience and functional learning.
Wonderful. I mean, I think that is so important for women who are pursuing leadership, and I think something that we often don't understand how much it makes a difference in terms of access to the C-suite, having that financial literacy and being able to understand what drives this business, what are the costs, what are the opportunities for revenue, and how do those change as the business unfolds? What are some things that we can do to increase the revenue, and what are the KPIs of this business? I think anytime you're looking at a company, you need to think about not just I want this job, but what does this company need, and be able to look at the financial statements and infer certain things from those financial statements so that you can help them to see what is the value that you bring. How are you looking at this through your lens of the value that you bring, and seeing, well, listen, here are some things that I can impact, I can add to. I think that you're leaving money on the table. I think you're paying too much for certain things from your vantage point, and using that to create a whole new value proposition for yourself within the role within the organization.
No, absolutely. And I would say it could be perceived as daunting, right? But as you said, it's really sometimes coming down to inference and really kind of piecing together the dots, right? I would say, for anyone who aspires into leadership, you really need to understand what's your piece of the puzzle. I don't have ACCA. I'm not an accountant, but I've learned enough to be able to understand the key elements, that drive business results and the metrics that are considered performance drivers, right? So, anyone can learn this skill. So if you don't have it yet in your current role and you're a young female who's, aspiring to leadership, it's definitely a requisite. You need to understand metrics. You need to understand how your role impacts the organization and what return on investment are they getting from investing in you in this position. So it's definitely something that you can raise your hand and say, okay, I'd like to learn more. And when you look at let's say the model that works for education, it's kind of what they call 70-20-10, right? So 10% of it's coming from classroom type settings or courses, 20% coming from mentorship, and 70% is actually coming from experience. So if you don't have, business acumen and financial understanding, you literally just need to raise your hand and buddy with those who are doing the role. Sit with the accountants, sit with your co-pilots, sit with people in the organization who touch the numbers and start asking questions. Ask to be invited to board meetings, ask to be invited to business reviews where you literally sit and listen. And through that, exposure, you start to connect the dots on your own. And then the 10% element is the work that you do to really kind of study a little bit and understand the basics. That would be my advice.
Such a great point, especially about asking questions. I mean, that's the easiest way to understand, especially if you don't. So you look at something and you're like, I don't understand. Why is this 1.3 million? Why isn't it more? Why isn't it less? And what does this line mean? And how does this, if this goes up, what does it mean for the end result, our net revenue, so start asking questions and don't feel bad if the questions feel silly, just because you will learn and you will grow and you will discover new things and be exposed to new things and be willing to help, to say, is there some way I can help you in the preparation of the financial statements, or something that I can do that would be meaningful? What is your biggest headache with preparing the financial statements? And that way you might actually be able to roll your sleeves up, learn something, and then support someone else. And sometimes learning is painful, so you have to take a chance and be willing to put yourself out there, knowing that you don't know yet. But
Correct.
you can figure it out. You can find out. I mean, all of us, you're not born learning how to read, learning how to talk, knowing how to talk, learning how to read, knowing how to run. Look at how much you've been able to learn so far. So give yourself a little credit and understand that you are capable of knowing hard things. So if you don't know, be willing to get into a tough spot where you claw your way out and figure it out.
Yeah, and I would add to that, for young women, be brave enough to ask, and I've listened to a lot of different TED Talks, a lot of different research, and they say, for example, men might have 60% of requirement for something and apply for a job, and a woman would not apply unless she has met 100% of the requirements. And sometimes even in a business setting, we may have excellent questions to be asked and we hold back, whether it's due to self-doubt or different elements. And sometimes that's psychology. We need to just shut it down and say, I'm going to ask the question, because at the end of the day it's going to benefit me to understand. So as young women, when you're building your base of experience and you're building your tacit knowledge, ask questions. I have, in my experience, been pleasantly surprised that people tend to stop and they want to share their knowledge. They're willing to help you to understand. So if you say, hey, would you mind explaining that again? I just want to be clear. I would like to understand more. People will literally take the time to do it. So I would say for young women, don't doubt. Be brave. Put your hand up, ask the question, learn, grow, develop.
Yep. And sometimes, it's been those times when you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is such a silly question. And you ask the question and everybody's like,
and
oh my
all
God.
in your head.
Yeah. Everybody's like, that's a great question. Nobody knows the answer. And you're like, well, it's certainly something we should figure out, right?
Correct.
So definitely be willing to put yourself forward. And it at least shows that you have an interest and that you are willing to grow. So now that you're in this role at Nestle, you get through the harrowing interview process. What is it like starting out at Nestle?
Of course, quite intimidating, so you're coming from, let's say, a local organization into a multinational, and it is quite a pivot in terms of, business routines, sources of data, different matrix structures, whereas, in local organizations, you tend to have just one direct reporting line. Within the multinationals, you have local contacts, above market contacts, head office contacts, and you're really navigating through quite a lot of complexity. I would say that, during my time, I was really blessed to have good leaders. Not so great ones along the way too, but I would say some really great ones in the early days that took the time to invest, to share their knowledge, to guide me. I remember the country manager at that time, he's now retired, a Swiss guy. I remember the lunchtime conversations. He would come around and he say, Elisa, so how look things, English wasn't his first language, and he would sit with me, and I remember him, always taking the time to draw things out and help me to connect the dots. And, he'd ask me, little questions like, what's your marginal contribution on this? So what's your, always like a good mentor. So I would say in the early days, it was really just learning and understanding and finding, my way. Because within the multinational environment, no one's holding your hand, right?
Yeah.
There's of course onboarding, and there's of course frameworks, but you have to have the initiative and the drive, to kind of understand clearly what's your piece of the puzzle, what are you responsible for bringing in this role, and then the how to do it is really up to you. So I would say it was a nice learning journey in the early days. Of course, I had joined the organization at a relatively young age, in my 20s. So full of energy, passion, no kids yet, so it was really a great learning journey at that time, and just making my connections within the organization, who to go to for what, which business routines, what needs to be prepared, how do I lead a business review, which cycles of planning are required, what's my input in certain meetings. So I would say at the early stages, it was really just finding my way. And then, through progressive roles, I really learned how to continuously, build my responsibility and scope within the organization.
Okay, and how did you grow within that position? You mentioned matrix. Not my favorite sort of distribution. It's always so confusing because you have competing demands. How did you navigate that piece?
I would say honesty and communication and alignment. So I would say it would be really having direct conversations with those that I reported to, and really trying to understand from their perspective, what do you need of me? And then when you piece those together, you then, you'd start to prioritize, so Kobe talked about it, the big rocks. I always tend with young ones joining the organization, show them that little video about the big rocks theory, because it's quite easy to be busy, but not effective. And I would say what was, and I think even today, everyone's, I'm so busy. But when you look back at your day, at your month, at your year, have you achieved what you wanted? And if not, then you've wasted your energy. So I would say the early days within this matrix structure was having connection points and touch points with these leaders, and understanding, what do you expect of me, so that I am clear on what the expectation is. And then, okay, if it's multiple stakeholders, how do I then rank these in order of priority or business impact or urgency, to be able to start plugging away at, what needed to be done. And I would say from that process is what helped me to kind of navigate that matrix type. And it was really about prioritizing and having clear alignment of the expectation.
I love that. I mean, I think that is so important with the big rocks. And for those of you who haven't heard this story, if you're trying to fill a jar, if and you have big rocks, little rocks, and sand, if you pour in the sand or the little rocks first, you won't have space for the big rocks. But if you put in the big rocks first, and then you then sort of fill in the spaces with the little rocks and then the sand, you can get everything in the jar. And it's about, what are your priorities? What are the big things you need to accomplish? And then what are some of the smaller things that are still necessary? And then what are the things that you have to do nonetheless? So for example, I think in my role, it's the big rocks are the delivery of projects. The little rocks are the meetings and
Emails.
the emails and the phone calls. And in this day and age, we are so interruption driven, and understanding that sometimes you do not have to be. If someone is calling you, but it is not urgent, and You don't know if it's urgent, but you assume it's urgent because it's a phone call. But clearing your schedule and clearing your space and your time to focus on the things that are big rocks, and every day being very clear. These are my big rocks, and this is what I plan to do today, versus allowing the day or your email inbox to attack you. And then at the end of the day, end of the week, end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year, like Elisa said, you've not achieved anything you set out to achieve because you've allowed other people to steal your schedule versus owning your schedule and allowing people to fit in as the sand and the rocks. And sometimes they include some water, which you pour on top of everything else.
So true. And I would say, that's one thing that I've kind of, really been driving over the last few years with myself and my team, and even received good 360 feedback. My team is always like, you bring a sense of calm. And it's because I understand that not everything necessarily has to be done in every particular day. Some things are going to roll over on the to-do list, but let those be the less meaningful things. And try to put time and effort to the things that really make a difference, that are essential, that have business impact, that are time bound, or that within a value chain can impact someone else. So make sure that those things are tackled first, and then everything tends to fall into place afterwards. No one is going to beat you over the head for not responding to every single email, but make sure and put your time and effort into the things that are most valuable, because that's how you balance energy. And I think as an executive, as a mother, you have different roles that you balance, and to be able to give your best self to both, you have to balance your energy levels. And I think for the young, upcoming executives or those who aspire to leadership, this element of prioritization and really trying to focus your time and your energies in the best way is what's going to help you, to really sustain a long and meaningful career, not just being busy, because it's, it gets tiring being busy.
Absolutely. So was that the best advice you've gotten? What's the best advice you've gotten?
I would say one that kind of hit me hard, but it was a real pivot for me when I was starting my leadership journey, was be vulnerable. Because I had, as an individual contributor, as a female, you tend to build this confident persona up, right? And you almost have some protection mechanisms in there that you don't let any and everyone in because you don't trust everyone. Not everyone has good intentions, along your journey. So I would say when this particular market head said to me, Elisa, be vulnerable, share more of you. If more people got to know the real you, they'd appreciate you so much more. Take my stupid advice. And that hit me hard because I realized that I, was not sharing my whole self. And I started to break down the walls a little bit, brick by brick, and started to let more people in. And the response was amazing. It was almost as if, bees were drawn to honey. It's really been advice that I think was very meaningful and I needed at that stage, because it's one thing to be, a solid professional, well respected and known for delivering results and a role model in terms of, a female executive. But then if you don't share your human side and show that you're human too, when you make mistakes and you don't know everything, and sometimes you're a little bit overwhelmed too, people will not, see you as attainable within, that circle. So you have to kind of balance, the professionalism and your say work ethic and your professional standards with a little bit of human elements in there. Because I've seen where being more vulnerable, people have connected with me at a deeper level. And it was a quite meaningful pivot for me, being able to lower my guard and seeing that, the reward was better than the risk.
Oh, I so agree. I think it's great, not only for you and being able to just be human and allow people to see you as human, but also for people who aspire to get where you are, to understand that, listen, it's not easy and it's not always roses and butterflies, and you do fall on your face sometimes, and it's about the getting up after that happens.
Absolutely.
And, letting your team know that, listen, you can come to me with what's going on with you, because we need to deal with you as a human being.
They're good days and bad days. There are moments in time, there are phases. And many times, I've had many of my team members have had kids who's going through a childhood SEA, who's going through something else. And once you have that understanding, the team becomes a lot more empathetic, and it really becomes like a safe space. So
Yeah.
that was something that I would say in my leadership style, I really try to create like this safe environment where people could let their guard down, including myself, and really kind of say, I'm having a bad day. I am lost. I am overwhelmed. And can someone guide me? And we'd be like, okay, what's the situation? Let me know what's happening, as opposed to, is everything good? Yeah, we're good. And then you're there
Yeah.
crumbling, behind a facade of everything being okay. So I would say, definitely as a woman in leadership, that's been something that I've kind of developed over time, and I would definitely share with those around you. Kind of balance that element of the vulnerability, and knowing that even people that you respect and people that you admire have bad days.
Yeah.
So it's how do you kind of be authentic through that, and just as you say, pick yourself up when the pieces fall. How do you go again when things are tough?
No, that's such phenomenal advice. And, something that we all need to remember is, that you're human at work. You're still
A
you.
whole person.
You're still an entire human being with a whole life that's going on in the background. And if people don't know what's going on with you, it's really difficult for them to relate, but also really difficult for them to support you as you require support in your role. And it's also really hard if you don't let your guard down for others to let their guard down, for you to know when you need to be the one providing support and helping others to sort of close the gaps that exist, because we are all human.
Correct. Correct.
Phenomenal. All right. So is there anything else that you want to share? I really appreciate it so much. My time with you. If there's any last parting gifts that you want to share with us before we thank everyone and say goodbye.
I would probably say one of the pieces of advice that I would share is that everyone has a superpower, right? And then I remember in my early days, I used to compare myself to a CFO and think, wow, am I ever going to be that good with a P&L? And then I realized, but wait, no, I'm not the CFO. I don't need to be that good with the P&L. What's my superpower? What do I bring to the table? And there's this quote that bounces around the internet, and it's claimed to be Albert Einstein, but it's actually unclear where the origin is. And it actually quotes, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its entire life believing that it's stupid. And sometimes people are just going down a path where then they're trying to work on what they consider their weaknesses or their areas of improvement. And you can put so much time there and so much effort and still get a mediocre result. But if you really hone in to what is your unique superpower, your strengths and talents, what are the things that give you energy? What are the things that you're just great at without effort? And how could you really develop those? Those actually go from talents to superpowers. And then that's what gets you noticed. That's what helps you to stand out from the crowd. That's what helps you to have a reputation that is beyond your reach, so that people speak about you when you're not in the room. And I think, for young ones coming up, I consider myself like a big sister in the industry. So I've enjoyed coaching and mentoring many young ones. And it's always that constant discussion I have with them. What are your raw talents? What are your strengths? And how can you hone in on those, develop those, and make them your superpower? Because if you spend all of your time fixing gaps, it's not necessarily going to give you the same return. So that would probably be a piece of advice that has been really meaningful and very, very helpful in my personal journey, but also I have seen transformational developments of, let's say, raw talent with another line manager, and they weren't connected, there wasn't that chemistry. And I said, okay, send him to me, I'll take him. And you take this person in a raw state of talent, you kind of coach them, you give them direct feedback, tough love, mentoring, and then you see them just transform into who they were meant to be. And it's a very proud moment as a leader to say, wow, look at where you've come from and look at what you are now. And I've had many instances like that, in my role at Nestle, where, someone was misunderstood, and then now they're key talent, high performing, and a role model in the organization, just from someone taking the time with that bird's eye view to say, what is your talent? Let me help you bring that to life. So I would say that would be my parting advice to the young ones out there.
That's absolutely brilliant. And I'm going to take a minute to put you on the spot. What is your superpower?
And all of my profiling, so I have done Clifton Strengths, I've done DISC, I have done HBDI, whole brain thinking. I consistently have a consistent theme of innovation, creativity, and futuristic. So I'm a very good ideator. I'm very good at seeing clutter and the roadmap to the way forward. So I almost use my mind as an analogy of an HDTV. You ever see those fixer-uppers and it just looks dingy and grimy, and then you just see a transformation happen. That's what my brain does. I'm able to see a problem and create a solution in my mind and actually work through it to get that done. So I would say innovation and creativity and a bit of strategic thinking has been my personal superpower.
Phenomenal. What a strong way to end. Thank you so much, Elisa Doldron. This has been a great conversation, and thank you for sitting through this conversation with us. And I hope that you identify your superpower. And if you're watching this on YouTube and not on one of the other podcasts, please, in the comments, tell us what your superpower is, because we want to know. And we want to, I think you're absolutely right. Focus on your strengths. Rather than chasing down your weaknesses, because you gain exponentially focusing on building and solidifying your strengths versus trying to mitigate for your weaknesses. It's a huge, huge pivot point for you. So thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to speaking with you the next time. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and recommend this to somebody else who's coming up on their career journey and needs some great advice, because we definitely, and network in the comments. You guys should be networking with each other. We definitely need to see more diversity in leadership and different kinds of leaders to create the world that we'd like to see. So thank you so much for spending this time with us, and see you next time. Bye.